Westside Church family. Just wanted to share with you what happened on Tuesday of Passover week. So we know on Sunday Jesus rode into Jerusalem on the donkey's colt rather, and that as he came in, the people were praising him, and the religious leaders were rebuking them and rebuking Jesus for accepting that praise, and how Jesus said, hey, if they're silent, then the stones will cry out. We know that right after that Jesus then goes out and looks at Jerusalem, and he weeps over the city. And the reason why he was weeping over the city is because of the judgment that he had just pronounced on them, that they rejected their Messiah who had come to them. They missed the day of their visitation. And so he goes on to say that the city would fall. And of course that happened in AD 70. In fulfillment of his prophecy there, Jerusalem was leveled by the Romans, and the temple was destroyed. We know that also he said that there would be a day before he returns when they would say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And we know that in the end, right before Christ returns again in his second coming, the Jews are en masse going to repent of their sins and come to Jesus as their Messiah. So that all happened on Sunday. On Monday, we talked about how Jesus went into the temple and began turning over the tables and driving out the money changers and spilling the coins everywhere and driving out the animals that they were selling. And he said, that this was supposed to be a house of prayer for all nations, that this was he called it my house. So he knew who he was as God incarnate coming to his temple. This was in fulfillment of Malachi chapter 3 we saw. Well, one other thing Jesus did on Monday that carries over into Tuesday is that Jesus saw a fig tree when he was with the disciples, and he cursed the fig tree. And we talked about how that was actually an enacted parable, meaning that it had nothing to do really with a fig tree at all. The fig tree was a symbol, there was a real fig tree, but it was a symbolic action that God was expecting to find fruitfulness, and he did not find fruitfulness, and so he cursed them. And actually, on Tuesday, they're coming back into Jerusalem again. They've gone out, they're coming back in, and the disciples see that the tree that Jesus had cursed on Monday was withered to its roots. And you read about that in Mark chapter 11, verses 20 through 25. And so they see this thing and they're like, whoa, Jesus, look at this, And of course, Jesus knows that he is the Son of God, and this is just further evidence to them that the person that is saying these things isn't crazy, that he knows exactly what he's saying, and that he has come to his people and he hasn't found them fruitful. Well, as they walk past the fig tree, then they go into the temple once more. Okay, so Jesus is not done yet. And of course, on sight of Jesus, him walking into the temple, we read about this in Mark chapter 11, that there are these controversies that begin, and he spends the entire day in the temple teaching, and not just teaching as he would with the masses. And he was a wonderful teacher and gave amazing parables and that sort of a thing. But he actually there was a sharp edge to the teaching that he gave on Tuesday. He did not pull any punches. He pronounced woes upon the religious leaders who rejected him. And he basically, he just called them out for what they were. And then they, in turn, challenged him and began asking him questions like, well, what about paying taxes to Caesar? They were trying to trap him so that it would either look like he was supporting Caesar, which all the Jews hated, or it would look like he was going against Rome and Caesar by denying that Jews should pay taxes, which all of Rome hated. And they wanted to stop anyone starting that sort of revolution, and so they wanted to trap him. And then they brought up the resurrection, and what about, if a man marries a woman, and then he is he dies, and then the woman is by law Levirate marriage. She was to take the man's brother, and as her husband. They go into all these, what if a woman had all of her husbands died and all this stuff, and she kept on marrying, and then finally she gets to heaven, which husband she's going to be married to. They're trying to trap him. They're trying to present him in a position where he's stuck. Well, Jesus cannot be backed into a corner. He cannot be stopped. He is the God, the creator of the heavens and the earth. And so, in each time they try to trap him, Jesus turns it on them and traps them in what they're saying. So I would encourage you, if you want to read up on what happened on Tuesday, there is a lot in the Bible. As a matter of fact, Matthew chapter 21, somewhere in chapter 21, all the way to the end of chapter 25 covers that. And if you're looking in the Gospel of Mark, Mark chapter 11, starting at verse 20 and going all the way to chapter 13, through the chapter of 13, we get to see how Jesus went head on with these Pharisees and religious leaders and the scribes and that sort. The last thing that Jesus talked about, as he gave these different parables, in each parable had something to do with just how sinister and deceptive these false teachers, these religious leaders were, and there was a reference to when Jesus, or when the Messiah, the Son of Man, comes back, and he's going to judge these people. And then when you come to the end of his time on Tuesday, as he's teaching, he gives what is known as the Olivet Discourse, and that is on the Mount of Olives, that he describes how, of course, he describes again how the temple's going to be destroyed, but he describes events that are going to come in days ahead, and not only the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, which came to pass, but also in the days just prior to his return, and how he is going to call to account every single human being. And so what do we get from that? What does it mean for us that Jesus went head on with these religious leaders, and that he stood against them? Well, one of the things that you notice in Mark chapter 13, for instance, is that as Jesus speaks about the signs of the end of the age, and he speaks about the coming of the Son of Man, there is one phrase that is used all throughout that, and that is, be on your guard, or be alert, keep awake, stay awake. And what Jesus is trying to tell us is that just as he first came into the temple and turned over some tables and taught with great power and authority, so he is going to return in great power and authority. And we must, as his disciples, be living lives where we expect his return. People say, well, what about this coronavirus? Is this evidence that God is going to return soon, that Jesus is going to come back soon? Well, the Bible tells us that these things are just going to continue to increase, that they are birth pains until the final day that Jesus does return. We do know that we are closer now than we ever have been to Christ's return. I don't think we need to look at this particular coronavirus issue as something brand new. There have been things far worse that have hit us as humans in this sin-cursed and broken world. But we should expect that Christ is going to fulfill his word, and that just as he fulfilled all those promises to come the first time, so he is going to fulfill all of these promises to return a second time. Are you ready to meet Jesus? Are you ready for him to split the eastern sky and to come back in his glory? That is the question that we must grapple with. We must make sure that we're living lives that reflect him, because he is going to be coming back very soon. So hopefully that helps you guys out about what happened on Tuesday. If you have any questions or whatever, just write it in a comment below, and I will try to help you out with that. So I pray that you guys have a blessed and safe coronavirus stay-at-home week here, and that the Lord continues to prosper you in your walk with the Lord and in your faith in him.